Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of Courageous Leadership Academy Live. In the promotion leading up to today's episode, I said in the social media post that today's guest is one of my favorite people on this planet. I am beyond thrilled that you all get to meet her today. Stephanie Jirard has worn many hats throughout her life and career, and she continues to do so. And that list is impressive, and it's way longer than what I can share in this initial intro. But I do want to share with you that she is a former private first class in the United States Army Reserve, where she was a medic, a former lieutenant in the JAG Corps. After being honorably discharged from the military, she was a trial attorney at the United States Department of Justice, as well as an assistant United States attorney and an assistant federal public defender. She's a mom and author. She taught for years as a faculty member in the Criminal Justice Department at Shippensburg University. That's how we met. And she now serves as the Chief Diversity Officer for Shippensburg University. It is my true pleasure to introduce you all to Stephanie Jirard. So let's go ahead and bring her into the broadcast.
Yay! Thank you, Kelly.
Thank you. I am so excited that you're here. This is a true pleasure and a treat for me. So is there anything else that you would like to share in terms of your background, an intro, what you're doing now, anything else that you'd like to share with people?
Well, I will say, since I did not know what the introduction was going to be, you are one of my favorite people. And I'm honored. And as I've said before, so proud of your trajectory in bringing your skill and knowledge to everybody, because so many people can benefit from what you have to offer. So the privilege is mine, my friend. I'm very happy to be here.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So, our topic for today, our theme for our discussion is, what it means to be courageous. And that's, really when I started this channel, one of the things that I said was I wanted to talk about courageous leadership. And so, our theme today, what it means to be courageous, you've certainly had to figure that out along the way with all the different hats you've worn and all the different life experiences. So I think, first, let's open it up with, how do you define, what it means to be courageous, what courageous leadership means? What does all that mean to you?
And it's true. I will say, looking back now, I'm almost 60 years old. So having this career, I've had, and knowing what the subject matter was, I had to pinpoint certain highlights of my life where I really did act courageously and was quite proud of that, but also where I didn't act courageously. So let me just first share with you what I believe to be the definition of courage. And that's being afraid and acting anyway. And so managing fear is a large part of courage. Now, when you marry courage with leadership, it becomes a bit different, because leadership, of course, is inspiring those who work for you. It's being a role model and being truthful and acting with integrity and living your ideals. And it's also caretaking for the people who you are leading. So how can you both be courageous and a leader is really sometimes a balancing act. But I do find step number one into be a courageous leader is to spend quiet time with yourself. Now, this is, I don't know if this is a good thing or a bad thing during the pandemic, since most of us, have been somewhat isolated and alone. But I'm always looking at the silver lining in the cloud. And it has given us this time away from the workplace for some of us, some time to really be with ourselves. So when you are with yourself, because leadership comes from a place of power. There's a good, strong leader shares power and is generous. A weak leader hoards power and is fearful. All right. So if you want to be a good leader, you really have to know who you are and what you really think about things. And so, for example, what do you think? Are you a Picasso or a Van Gogh person? And of course, well, what are you thinking? Well, geez, what difference does it make? Well, a good leader knows everything about everything, because you need to relate to everybody. You need to relate to anybody that you run into on the street, to the president of the United States. You need to relate to everybody. So arts and music, what do you really think about those things? Do they speak to you? Likewise, what do you think about the death penalty? Are you for that? Are you thinking of retribution, or are you a person of mercy? What's your real belief system? And again, you may not think that this has anything to do with leadership, but what you believe, of course, is how you act. It's your inspiration for action. Right. And as my new friend Al just said a little bit ago, we act based on our intentions, but we're judged based on our actions. Mm. So how you lead from who you are really is going to determine whether or not you can be courageous.
Yeah, I love that, that sense of, tuning into your beliefs and your core values. And that is such a key piece of effective leadership and courageous leadership, because if you don't know what you believe, and if you don't know those core values, then you're going to be all over the place. You're not going to have those as guiding principles. And so I absolutely think that's 100% on, being able to understand the things that truly matter to you and where you stand, so that you can effectively lead. I really appreciate that you shared that. I
do believe that opportunities for courageous leadership aren't planned for. They're quite unexpected. Mm-hmm. And so when I was thinking of certain instances about my times that I think I was courageous, and of course we can talk about that, looking back, it wasn't something that just happened. It was something that I actually had prepared for on a smaller scale in my individual life. So let's just say, for example, you want to be a courageous leader. How can you train yourself to be a courageous leader? Because there is some study in neuroscience that people who are, who seem to act in a risk-taking manner tend to have more testosterone, and their frontal cortex, how they're hardwired are a bit different. So there are some things that you can't control about your ability to be out there and to lead. But there are some things that you can teach yourself. You can, and you start small. And that's always my advice. So when you see what you perceive to be an injustice in your everyday life, you can practice courageous leadership by speaking out. And I'll just share with you one of these. I mean, it's one of these instances in my life that I wasn't prepared for. And I remember it so vividly because I was so afraid. And it involves speaking in front of my son's 6th grade class. Now, you wouldn't think this, but it was. It was the whole 6th grade in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. And I was there because he was going to get an award. And before the award ceremony, the principal stood up and he said, everybody, we have a map out in the main hallway, and I'd like everybody to go put a push pin where you are from. I'm from Poland, and Mrs. O'Sullivan is from Ireland. And my heart started to pound. I actually thought I was going to get a little nauseous, like I was going to vomit. But I raised my hand, and the principal looked at me like, "What was I, nuts?" He called on me, and I went up to the stage, and I said, as a Black American, I'm sitting here wishing I could know where I could put a push pin, like where my people came from. But, as we came as enslaved people, as chattel, I couldn't do that. Now, the reason why I did that was to speak for all of the other Black and brown children who may have been thinking that, but of course, as 6th graders, are voiceless to do that. Right. And that's just an example where I could have sat down because I was terrified. I was worried about whether my son would be embarrassed and never talk to me again, or did I have an obligation that was larger than my fear? Right. And that's really courageous leadership. Right.
That's a really powerful story, because it's one of those things that can seem so mundane, can seem so innocent, but the underlying message there is so powerful. And I can see how that would be a terrifying, a terrifying thing to do, and because of all those layers that you just talked about. Yeah.
But it does prepare you now. Okay, so when you're in the workplace, most of what I consider to be courageous leadership was taking on authority. We're experiencing a time in our country where the body public, if you will, our relationship with authority has been fractured. Martin Luther King Jr., Dr. King said, a riot is the language of the voiceless, a language of those who don't feel that they've been heard. And what we're seeing in the country is we have a lot of people who feel ignored, maligned, and people in power are not responding to them or listening to their concerns.
Right.
What you think about that, right or wrongly, that's where this is coming from. And my advice to those of you who, again, you think, I want to do this, I want to be a leader who's viewed as courageous, is you first have to make sure that where the line is between challenging authority and being sort of too far afield, because most of us do work in organizations, we do work in institutions, and we have to be respectful. And as you're working your way up, for the young leaders in the audience, that there is a balancing act. So my advice is always make sure that you have some type of safety net to go ahead and challenge authority, because that's really what leadership is, to make the world a better place, but be okay with picking and choosing your battles, and not necessarily disrupting the whole organization because you feel so strongly you can't function any other way.
Yeah, that's a great point. It's doing that delicate dance of, not just sitting by and accepting things that, like you said, you view as, injustices or wrong, or just things that need to change. Not just sitting by and being voiceless, but learning how to channel that in the most productive way. And that can take some trial and error. That takes, a lot of relationship building too. I think particularly if you're talking about within an organization, for those that are up and coming, and even those that have been working for a while, to understand that balance and know when is really difficult. But that's too where I challenge leaders in the work I do and in this channel to create a space where that is okay. To create that space for open and honest dialogue, for critical feedback, for candor, to be able to cultivate a space where people can do that safely. That's the ideal scenario, when you have a leader, somebody in authority that is willing to go there with you and help you learn that. That's the good stuff. Unfortunately, not everybody is in that type of environment. And so learning that balance, and, maybe finding a mentor, finding somebody that can help guide you through that process. But that's a great point. Yeah.
One of the things that I've been suggesting, and again, I didn't create this, I learned this somewhere, but is for leaders, or, again, if you are in a safe space where you can do this, is for leaders to take, and again, where most of us are virtual and not face-to-face, but you can still do this in all formats, is you take a pencil or any type of object and you play musical chairs in a meeting or someplace where something germane to the organization is being discussed. And you pass around the object, and at some point you say, stop, and whoever has the object is tasked with giving the contrarian view, is tasked with giving the dissenting perspective. And this creates psychological safety. And especially in the work of diversity and equity and inclusion, being psychologically safe is paramount to moving the organization forward. Because Kotter's change model, which most young leaders know and old leaders, the steps of change in an organization, It starts at the bottom. You need buy-in from the bottom. It leads, of course, up like a stairway. But of course, the titular head of an organization has to have the vision.
Mm-hmm.
And what happens is people don't feel safe. So there was a study where they, again, I don't know who did it, but it dealt with examining mistakes in an emergency room or an operating room at a hospital.
Mm.
And what they found is where there was no psychological safety in this operating room, people did not voice concerns or problems that they saw during the operation, which led to fatal outcomes.
Right.
But those who had safety to speak out, to challenge, and not be fired or reprimanded or shunned,
Mm-hmm.
those operating rooms had much more evidence of success. So
Right.
you can create this environment intentionally. And of course, it goes without saying that the same person shouldn't always hold the object, and that there is no negative repercussion for the one to play the devil's advocate. And it's creating a healthy environment where people know that they can be free.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think I read about that study in the Culture Code, that book. I think they cited that study in there, and I thought that was fascinating, and it makes total sense.
Right.
But it is fascinating that we see time and again in every field, in every industry, just how important that psychological safety, that open communication, how that plays into success, whatever that measure of success would be. We see how that does have that direct connection. And allowing people to grow and be courageous is certainly a key piece. Thinking about difficult conversations, we talk about that a lot on this channel. How can we be courageous when we're dealing with or facing difficult conversations?
Yes. And so context matters. Okay. And the difficult conversation you're having, it depends on what brings about the need to be courageous. I think having in the moment, again, okay, sometimes you can plan these conversations. Sometimes these conversations just happen. My first piece of advice is in your own world, those of you in the audience, you should be aware of when you decide to speak or stay silent when somebody else is in the spotlight. And what I mean by that is, I've been in situations in a workplace where somebody is challenging authority, and I've had a decision to make. I can either join on to that conversation, or I can stay silent and let this particular person take the brunt of what might ever happen. And I may make that decision based on self-preservation or thinking that this person has a different agenda, but examining what my actions are and why. Right. Okay. And again, these are all small building steps to the point to prepare you for when you have a difficult conversation. So leadership and having these conversations is typically a product of patience and planning and perseverance, right? Mm-hmm. When you have a difficult conversation, and this can be used even just to try and imagine yourself being courageous, is you can often go through scenarios in your mind. We all do this. How many of us have, prepared to have a conversation with a loved one where we went over 50 million different scenarios?
Yeah.
And it never really turned out the way you thought.
Nope.
But that was okay. You at least had some soundbite that you knew you were going to get in. Right. So if the conversation just comes up and it's difficult and how you can be courageous, really my one piece of advice is to speak your truth and let the chips fall where they may. Mm. And again, this is very difficult, but it is the easiest thing to do. So many people whether you're a leader or not, spend a lot of time gaming the system to make things appear better than they are, to minimize their mistakes, because we're all afraid that something really terrible will happen to us if people, find out our flaws. And we're always sort of with the paintbrush coating the situation that doesn't necessarily reflect reality.
Mm-hmm.
So when you're in a difficult situation, if you speak your truth, whatever the context that brings out that conversation, you're going to be ahead of the game, because you can never go wrong with that.
Yeah, I completely agree. And it reminds me of, a situation where one of the people I was working with needed to have a difficult conversation with one of her employees. And, I said to her what I say to a lot of people when I do training, that even if, so yeah, you certainly prepare for the conversation, run through those scenarios. I agree, be prepared. But even if your worst case scenario happens, I mean, short of actual violence, but taking that off the table, even if your worst case scenario, they get upset, they storm out of the office, whatever, even then, I can pretty much guarantee you will feel better for having had the conversation. Because the longer you wait and it builds up and you stress over it and worry about it, you're just carrying that around. And so to just be courageous, have the conversation, speak your truth, yes, be respectful and do it all in the right way. But, you can't control how the other person's going to respond. You can't control their actions. All you can do is control that you have the courage to have the conversation, do it in the right way. And like you said, let the chips fall where they may. And no matter what, you'll feel better because you actually had that conversation. And, I think this also relates to, certainly there are times if we don't feel safe that perhaps we shouldn't speak up. Of course, right. There are times but generally, if we go ahead and do it, probably 9 times out of 10, we'll feel better for having done it. We'll feel that pride of speaking up and doing the thing, even if things don't work out perfectly. At least we demonstrated that courage, and we can feel proud of ourselves for doing that.
Absolutely, and again, one of these things I just learned today, as a matter of fact, from my new friend Al. He suggested that we, in that situation, and let's say it's a subordinate who you're redirecting. You're not necessarily firing, but you're going to help.
Right.
One of the things you could always ask is, how can I help you? How can I help you get to X? How can I help you get to yes? How can I help you get better in this situation? Because if there's one thing we've learned during the pandemic, is that many of us are suffering in ways that we could have never imagined.
Yes.
So we see each other in the squares of the internet. And so many of us have suffered so many losses and are dealing with trauma. And again, isolation for we're not at the water cooler. We're not seeing each other in the hallways and just saying, hey, how are the kids? How's everything going? There's something that you could discover by having the courage to have that difficult conversation, where you could help remove some impediment to real success. And you want to be able to do that, because it just from an economic standpoint, retraining, rehiring, all
right.
of that is enormously enormously expensive.
Yes. Yeah.
Ineffective.
Right.
So you want to be able to help.
Absolutely. Yeah, I completely agree. Expensive both in time and energy and money. It's a lot. And I agree too that, and I say that a lot about asking those targeted but open-ended questions, because that's where, if you just say, how are you? Well, what answer are you going to get? But if you say, what's the biggest challenge you're facing right now? Or what's one thing I could do to make your job easier right now? Or, and I think sometimes we don't ask those questions because we are a little bit afraid of what answer we might get, and, discovering some of those things. But like you said, we need to go there. We need to have those conversations, because that's how we move forward. That's how we take care of one another. And that's just how we not just survive, but thrive.
Yes.
Yeah.
And of course, you do have to be careful. Of course, there's two sides to every coin, because I
Right.
have had these conversations and then have people think that I'm their best friend. And as
Mhm.
a leader, you can't have that either,
Right.
because then they think when things go wrong, you're going to bail them out.
Right.
So you do have to always frame these difficult conversations with, I want to be helpful and I really want to know, because I'm going to be the bridge to get you to X, Y, and Z. And but let's be clear that we're having this conversation because it's a workspace issue that has real consequences.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting flip side to that, so often we talk about, and I think about encouraging people to bring down some of the boundaries, but there is again, a fine line there in a dance that you still need it. Sometimes it takes more courage to set up the boundaries. For some people, they're so they're so open, and they need to actually have some courage to set boundaries with people. So that's a great point.
Well, in my experience being a teacher, I often found that students thought that I was actually a mother figure to them, just by being a woman. Could have been that I was Black, could have been, but I would be asked certain things that I know my male colleagues would have never been asked. And it was, and so, again, you're always navigating this intersectionality of these personalities. And I always find that at some place, especially in the workplace and as a leader, there's one part of your personality that's dominant or subordinate given the context of the situation. And again, a good leader understands that.
Right.
And is aware of that as you go in and who you're dealing with.
Yeah. That's a really great point. In thinking about, you mentioned earlier some stories, and you shared one story where you created courage. Do you have other stories of either, again, where you demonstrated courage that you'd like to share, or maybe being vulnerable where you didn't?
Right. And so it's funny because sometimes, again, when we're talking about courage, we never think ahead, because some of the experiences that were offered, opportunities to grow, are unexpected. But you sometimes don't understand in the moment what life looks like when you fail to act in a courageous manner. So my experiences, and they're interrelated, one where I didn't act, and that was the springboard for acting, indeed were in the military. And I was just starting off in my career. So I was a young lawyer. And one of my very first cases was representing a lesbian. And this is before Don't Ask, Don't Tell. So being a lesbian was reason to be kicked out of the service. And it was an administrative board, and the captain of the ship came to testify against my client. Now, the captain of the ship runs everything, and everybody answers to the captain of the ship. So from a procedural standpoint of fairness, the captain coming to testify against my client was wholly inappropriate, a complete conflict of interest. And I didn't say anything. Now, I didn't say anything, number one, because in the military, it is really a strict hierarchy. It needs to be that way because officers are often sending enlisted people in harm's way. So you really can't have a dialogue. So it's a strict hierarchy, and the captain outranked me. And just from the structure of the organization, I didn't feel I could speak out. But my job in representing my client was to speak out. That was my job. And I didn't. And I lost that case. Well, we won on appeal because the captain essentially ruined the case. Okay. But that's not the point. The point is I cried for 3 days because I did not speak out. I was not courageous. Now that scarring experience stayed with me to much later in my career when I was representing a client in a death penalty case. And in a death penalty case, they send out juror questionnaires before you actually impanel a juror, because you want to weed people out who perhaps are so strong in their opinions about capital punishment. This one particular juror was very honest, because you sign it under the pain and penalties of perjury. Kill them all, kill them all, kill them all. And he meant criminal defendants in a death penalty case. He shows up to court And he's like, oh, I can be fair and impartial. I can be fair and impartial. And the judge was like, okay, you can be fair and impartial. And I really had to argue with the judge. It was similar now, okay? Similar to the hierarchy of authority. The judge was like the captain. And I really had to stand up, and I was alone, and argue and argue and argue in front of the juror that we should take his unvarnished opinion of capital punishment when he was in the safety and security of his own home, and he was killed him, rather than sort of the groupthink making everybody think he's wonderful, but that he could be fair and impartial. And the judge ruled against me and ruled against me and ruled against me, but I kept at it because I kept thinking, of course, lives are at stake, but how would I feel if I didn't keep at it and keep at it and keep at it till I my last breath? How could I go home if I just sat in silence? Right. In that situation, the judge eventually relented, but I wouldn't let it go. Mm-hmm. So in your life, and my friend Kim Garris, she said something like, our first three failures lead to our next greatest success. Mm. And leadership is organic. It's a breathing, living thing that needs to be nurtured and tendered, and we all have to keep learning and learning and learning. So when you have these experiences of failure, which are absolutely going to happen, where you're not courageous, understand that your opportunity is going to come. And again, that was just in the moment. I had no idea that this is how it was going to roll out in this particular situation. I couldn't prepare for that, right. But I wasn't. I even if the judge sanctioned me and punished me, it wouldn't have mattered, because that would have been less of a pain than what I felt when I didn't speak up as a young lieutenant in the Navy.
Yeah. Wow, that was amazing. And there's so many threads I would love to follow with that. And I have, Kim is also another one of my favorite people. She's amazing. That's a great quote, from her. And I think it's a good way to encapsulate everything you're saying, that, those that, like you said, when you might be courageous in the moment, but it's not just that moment. That's not what it's about. It's about everything that led you to that moment. So those opportunities before where you made mistakes, or, people might call it failure, or I just say failure is feedback, you learn from it. Those times where you made mistakes, those things all led you to this moment. And I think that is so excellent. And I can see that in my own life. There are times that I didn't act. Right. And I know if the opportunity presented itself again, I wouldn't make the same mistake, that I would absolutely speak up and act, because again, I know that feeling of how I felt now. And certainly, yes, they say in life, you regret the things you didn't do more than the things you did. And I think that that's true too. And again, there are different reasons why maybe we don't act at the time, but I think that the times that we regret more are the times that we didn't. And so using that experience as a lesson and as fuel to be courageous when that next moment arrives. I think that's amazing.
And it is, and you are absolutely correct, Kelly, that, sort of the negative is what we focus on. And I will often encourage leaders not to focus on the negative in the group, because there's a lot of leaders that will focus on what's not done right rather than reward what is done right. And it's hard to, because you're always, the only time you're giving feedback is when something goes wrong. And that's how it's just the culture, the business culture. Yep. But it's important to keep that positive spin on, again, as a leader, because they're looking to you to be a particular way. And I know, and speaking about courage and fear, the Harvard Business Review recommended this book by Stanley Rachman, Rachman, called Fear and Courage. And because how we started this conversation is it's really about navigating fear and courage. They're interrelated, but we're afraid all the time. Ralph Waldo Emerson, he who is not every day conquering some fear has not learned the secret of life.
Mm.
And that embodies how we can overcome our natural trajectory of just doing nothing.
Right. Well, the other thing I just have to say, circling back to your story, I have said for years that one of my things that I would love in my life is to be able to just sit in a courtroom and listen to you give a closing argument. I mean, I wish I could have been there when you were fighting and advocating and not relenting, with that judge, because I can only imagine how awesome that was to watch.
Yeah. And again, that took a while. I mean, it didn't happen overnight.
Right.
Yeah.
So in thinking about that, and I know we touched on this already, but just to circle back, if there's other pieces that you specifically want to tie in, we've mentioned that it really is about preparation. And so both using your experiences as preparation, but and understanding your core values, but understanding that it really is a process to get to that moment. Are there other things that people can do or be intentional about as they, live their days and prepare for those moments that they don't know when they might occur?
So yes, one of those things is, of course, education is key. So for example, and practicing how you're going to live. So earlier in this conversation, at the beginning, I used the word nuts, and of course, again, this is sort of being aware of how we grow up, our culture, our upbringing, our values, our beliefs. Now, I know better than to use that word. My mother worked in a state mental health facility her entire career. I have family members who suffer with a mental illness. And I just know, using that term, which I just did in an offhanded way because I didn't think about it, I know that might be alienating and offensive. And for that, I apologize. But I know that now, because I'm constantly learning and reading about the cultural landscape that is constantly changing.
Right.
It's not a disabled person, it's a person with a disability. Our language matters. How we frame life matters. How we look at life through our lenses of our glasses matter. And so LGBTQ, what's going on there? I have to read the Washington Blade. It's all online, but I need to understand what's important to the community. Where is the community at? I watch Fox News, I watch CNN, BBC, Al Jazeera, in the Middle East. I'm constantly educating myself because I don't want, and now I have to say this, okay, because in the diversity and inclusion world, a lot of people don't speak because they're afraid of making mistakes.
Right.
How do I refer to my Muslim friends? I'm afraid. Please, please, please. If what we've been going through as a country can tell us anything, can inform our behavior in any way, it's please just go ahead and do, rather than sit back and be silent. Right. If you do something wrong, they'll tell you, and you can apologize and move on. Right. So, for example, asking somebody how they'd like to be addressed. If they're trans and you don't know, a person in transition, or they have different pronouns, how do you go about that? Just ask, how would you like me to address you? My name's Stephanie and my pronouns are she and hers. You take it on, but you have to know to do that. Right. And so you're only going to do that by reading everything a little bit every day, little bit, 10, 15 minutes every day, to know that you need to keep educating yourself to be able to relate to everybody, because they're looking at you. Right. And again, the language, if I use it and I have in an inappropriate way, I have, my mother was overweight. I've called her a BBW, a big, beautiful woman. Some people might find that offensive, but that's how we spoke in my family. But I have to have some awareness that not everybody speaks that way. And again, I'm always open to learning. And if I make a mistake, I'm going to say I'm sorry.
Right. Yeah, I think that's a great segue, and I'll ask you maybe a follow-up if there's anything more you want to add to this in a second. But yeah, I appreciate you saying that so much, because yeah, I do think that we're so afraid to be wrong. So we just don't say anything. And I tell people that same thing all the time. Like, if you're asking from a place of genuine, wanting to know, out of respect and genuineness, people will be able to feel that. They'll be able, if you just say, "Oh, well, what am I supposed to call you?" Well, okay, that takes a very different tone than,
Right.
what's the
Right.
most respectful way that I can refer to you? How would you like to. So yeah, and I agree. It's better to say, "Look, I'm still learning. Like, help me understand, help me." And I think that is a great point, that it's, again, almost like I feel like I keep saying, kind of two sides to the coin. Yes, work to educate yourself. Like you said, work to educate yourself, work to be well-rounded, but don't feel like you have to know everything. You can ask, show that vulnerability and ask people. That's, just as courageous to do that. So I appreciate that. And, that segues to one of the things I wanted to ask you, because I think it does take a lot of courage for people who are not in some minority status, who want to be an ally, but aren't quite sure how to do it. They're not. And so how can people best be, demonstrate courage and be an ally and advocate for diversity, equity, and inclusion?
It's a wonderful question, and it's one that I find now. Again, I'm a silver lining in the cloud type of person that people are taking very, very seriously now, in ways where they've never done before. Well, I mean, and they're good. Everyone's, I believe, good at heart. I know people don't want to see that, but again, as a defense lawyer, people are made. They're not born a certain way, and try and remember that. And again, people do hurt people and commit egregious acts. I understand that, but they weren't born that way. Okay, so there's always some circumstances, taking that into consideration. So being an ally now, that people are really intentional about it. And let's just talk black and white. And I always use the terms that the census uses: black, African American, white, Caucasian. Let's just use that. I get a lot of people, my white friends, asking, "How can I be an ally?" And my answer is never changes, and that is, you need to talk to your people. So when I lead a diversity and inclusion discussion, I do it, and people are not necessarily on their best behavior, but they may not be truthful and honest with me as they would if they were with their own people in the Thanksgiving table after a Zumba class, or just talking to friends who you've been friends with for 20 years. People, you have much more authority with your friends and family who may have antiquated thoughts about race and gender, orientation, expression, identity, being ableism. They may have different views, religious tolerance, and you are the one that they're going to listen to in those spaces. We don't travel in those spaces.
Right.
And the other thing is to recognize how the rules always change for the benefit of the dominant culture, which is white America. Again, just speaking white and black, we're only 13% of the population. But people don't understand. I know we all watched in horror at the assault on the Capitol. And one of the first things that people said was, geez, this is, again, as I said, a mob is, as in Dr. King's words, the people don't feel listened to and respected, and they become violent. People said, but she said the Capitol Police, they let all these mobsters in and took selfies with them and, opened the gates. And people said, geez, if the color of those people were different, the law enforcement response would have been very different. Just an understanding and awareness that the rules do apply differently. I know that we, again, as a lawyer, I became a lawyer because I believe that all men are created equal. And yet with the stroke of a pen, you can write a law that changes the trajectory of a person's life based on skin color. I learned this in the 6th grade. I want some of this power that you can write a pen and make somebody a slave from birth till death. Wow. The pen is mightier than the sword, for sure. So just understanding that, and how you can be an ally. Again, what does the world look like with different glasses? If you were African American, could you see that somebody might feel that the law enforcement response was different? And believe me, I'm not getting into whataboutism about the summer protests in Portland and Seattle. I condemn all violence. People should know that. I do. And I'm not, that's not my focus. My focus is to be an ally, understanding that the world is different based on skin color. And I always say to people say, well, racism doesn't exist in America. And I say, well, would you like to wake up black tomorrow? And if you are not saying, yes, 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 is that because you're afraid you might get treated differently?
Right.
And if you're afraid you're going to get treated differently, if you woke up black tomorrow, that means something. Right. So allies are just in your own spaces. Speak up for us.
Right. Right. Yeah. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. I often end up thinking that sometimes doing very benign activities, I'll think, I have the privilege of doing this right now because I'm white. I'm a white woman. So what I'm doing is not perceived in any threatening way. It's not perceived like I have the privilege of doing this right now, simply because of the color of my skin. And I think the more that people can take an honest look, and be courageous and have those conversations, the better we'll all be.
Because it is freedom. It is freedom. Yeah. It's like privilege. And, the poor say, I didn't get anything. No one's handed me anything. I don't have any privilege. And that is true, but you have freedom. You have freedom to take a selfie with a police officer in any other situation where we would be shackled, if not worse. Absolutely.
Yeah. So in thinking about, we're getting close to, we still have some time, but I can't believe it, we're quickly approaching our hour here. It's hard to believe.
Because you and I could talk about these things all day.
I know, we could talk forever about everything. So I like to ask people, their top kind of do's and don'ts when it comes to, and you could encapsulate it in, being courageous or courageous leadership or leadership in general. Kind of what are your top do's and don'ts for people to keep in mind?
Yes, and I did, and to prepare for this, I did write it down because I did give it some thought. Right, this is sort of the preparation. My do's and don'ts. Let me start with the don'ts. It's like, what do you like first? Your good news or your bad news? Don'ts are, don't take it personally, and and that's very, very difficult to do. Some of the decisions that businesses make and organizations make do affect you personally, but don't take it personally, because then you're going to be motivated to act in a way that may not be in your best interest. The other thing is, don't act reflexively, instinctively. I always give my students the rule of 3. Okay, so you're angry and you want to write an email. Okay, write the email, but wait 3 minutes. Okay, then you look at it again. Do you want to send it? Okay, wait, 3 hours. Okay, you still look at it. You still want to send it? Wait 3 days. If after 3 days you want to send it, go ahead and send it. Right. But you'll always regret that act, that reflexive act. Because and the thing about social media and internet, and it's out there forever. It's like a secret. You have no control over it once it's out there. No control whatsoever. And so again, and don't withdraw in the face of challenges. Understand that it is an opportunity for you to grow. It is. Okay, so don't shy away from that. All right, what to do? As I said, speak your truth. That's going to guide you a long way in ways that you can't even see. What else to do? cultivate friendships, not just because people can help you, but because you genuinely care. So that's my last do. Help people when nobody knows about it. Do it when you're not taking credit. So I often offer my services to people on the QT. It's nothing that I do. And I'm not doing this for my benefit or for my career benefit, because when other people shine, that reflection will eventually get back to you. But that's not why I'm doing it. But you just want to always extend a hand when you can. You really do. That I think, I always tell young law students, look around you when you're sitting in a classroom. These are the people that you will call if you need a job or a lead on some clients. Or, like, how you relate to people today really will guide how your future is. And most people don't necessarily have that perspective. We tend to be very myopic. But if you do extend a hand, and genuinely, don't make stuff up just to be somebody. Get a lot of that. Should I put this on my resume? Should I do this to get a job? People can see right through that.
Right.
They really can. I am telling you, we've been on a lot of job searches, and you look and you just know this is a ticket puncher, rather than a genuine person. So again, that goes back to being real and live your life. Go to beat your drum, dance to your music. We only go around this world once, and if you're constantly, as we started our conversation, unmoored and letting people, in their decisions, because you're afraid to make a decision. Understand, not making a decision is a decision.
Right.
But if you're living somebody else's dream or wishes for you, it leads to, you can be unhappy. Right. So happiness in the workplace is really striving for leadership positions.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you so much. That was a lot of great info in there. And I appreciate all of it. I appreciate those don'ts and do's, and and just everything you shared today. And I appreciate you,
Same.
To share those stories and be vulnerable. And really appreciate that.
As I said when you contacted me, anything for you. And I mean,
thank you. Yes. And the same goes for you. But thank you so much. All right. Well, that ends our time here. So thank you all for tuning in. And thank you again, Stephanie.
Yes. Goodbye.